Welcome to Series 2 of the Big Change podcast, brought to you by Callisto Grand. In this series, the focus is on leaders and entrepreneurs, people who break the mold and push back barriers to fulfill dreams and ambitions and are successful in their own right. We explore the change catalysts and how to maintain passion, focus and dedication over a long period of time.
Most organisations have been, really positively surprised by how well they responded and turned on a sixpence, turned on a dime to move to remote working, and things had to be digital.
In this interview, we explore what makes a successful business leader. My guest today is Dan French, Chief Executive of Consider Solutions, whose work life stretches back to the late 70s, roughly the same timeline as my own. So, good morning, Dan.
Morning, Mark. Is this where the old guys get together?
This is it, yeah.
Okay.
We can talk about retirement and stuff like that. So going back then to your young days, were you always an outlier, would you say?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure I'm an outlier now, but I think when I was young, I definitely used to think about stuff more broadly than a lot of my contemporaries. I used to think about implications of stuff and talk about things, and my friends would go, "What are you talking about? Just let's go and play football." So I think maybe the way I think about things, maybe a little bit of an outlier. I think risk taking is something you have to kind of learn, and maybe I think that's relevant to business as well. About you've got to be prepared to take some risks, and so maybe a bit of that, but then the kind of kids always do a bit of that maybe. And I think the other thing I recall being slightly different about was adaptability. So like when you go through school, you have lots of different there's lots of different groups of people, lots of different tribes in your school, as you will remember. And I developed a technique to be quite adaptable, to be able to meld into all of them, or all the ones I wanted to. So, and of course that wasn't very common. But there was things I wanted out of life, which I wanted to be in certain groups, and there's some fun I got with other groups, and I think that has actually lasted quite a bit in life, to be honest.
Mm. Was there did you have any early influences or people you were inspired by?
I probably was distinctly uninspired as a child, but I did have one person, my uncle, my mother's brother, who I probably saw about once or twice a year. He lived a long way from us, and he ran his own business, and the business was actually the parts for vintage Bentleys. And he was a lovely guy, but for an adult, he seemed much more personable and likable than most of the adults I knew. And he was interesting and quite exciting because he had these cars, and he'd come up in these cars and take me for a ride in the cars. And the fact he ran his own business, I thought he just seemed a lot more. He seemed to enjoy his life a lot more than the other people around, the other adults around who worked for big companies or the government or whatever. So that was kind of interesting. I often thought about that.
And did that? Do you think that was sort of the genesis, that at some point you were going to run your own business? Was that kind of in the back of your mind as you went through your teen years and so on?
I don't think I ever thought about it, to be honest. That so he, I kind of saw him through till I was about, I'd say a couple of times a year till I was about probably 16 or 17 years old, and then probably didn't see him. Probably saw him twice again in the rest of his life until he died. When you go off doing things, you just don't see sort of distant relatives so often, although he wasn't that distant. But I never really thought about running my own business at all until quite a lot later, when then a few things started to kind of come up where I saw bits of the businesses I was running. We had, for various reasons, we needed to sell off bits of the business, and I would have colleagues who would sort of take those businesses and take them off. And I thought that's kind of interesting, and they did very well out of it. And I thought, you know, I'm doing most of the work here, and these guys are seem to be doing very well out of it. So I started to think about that later on, but it came back then. For most of my life, I'd never really even considered it.
So your path then to consider solutions was you were you went to school, you went to university, and then you were an employee.
I didn't even go to university. I have a confession to make. At the age of 18, after doing my A levels, I was very, very desperate to. I mean, I'd been working sort of evenings and weekends while doing, you know, for quite a lot of my school life, and I just wanted to get out and move out of my town I lived in. I wanted to get to London. I wanted to be working. I just didn't want to be doing any more education, which I think was something that was probably also echoed by my teachers by the time I'd finished.
It was a recommendation.
So I wanted to get out, and I was desperate to go to work. And quite a lot of my friends who did A levels also said, well, let's go to work. So a lot of people went to London to start jobs at 18. And this was just before the time where university for everyone became the thing. And, you know, those 3 years that I would have spent in university, I had a great time, and I, you know, developed and progressed, and I did quite a lot of, I did that for 2 or 3 years, and I spent a year traveling. So I did my own gap year, even without anything to gap, as it were. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. So I didn't go to university. So I went and I got a job as a trainee in what was called management services, which is kind of interesting in the current world, because management services, when I started out for big companies, was all of the back office of the big company, which was finance, IT, procurement, HR, and all the rest of it, which funnily enough sounds a lot like global business services now. And so I got a trainee job in there, and in fact, the first thing I asked the careers office when they had such a thing. I went to a careers office. I said, what if I leave school with good A levels, but I don't want to go to university? What's the job I can get paid the most? Which is a good 18-year-old question, right?
Yes.
So they looked at it and they said, right, there's two things. You can go into printing. I went, really? What's that? So I thought, okay, go to work for one of the big, you know, there were people who were printers. I didn't know, you know, you can get paid well for that. Or you can go into data processing, which is IT. I said, oh, they both sound really crass, horrible jobs. So I thought, well, printing sounds even worse than this data processing. So I took an aptitude test and got a job. So I went into this management services department, and I went through a career of going through an IT sort of career path, which at one point I had to make a decision, which I think is pretty pivotal for me. I had to make a decision whether I was quite enjoying the technical stuff, the application of, you know, logic essentially to solve, you know, complicated problems, computing problems, I suppose, for business. And I had a decision. I was offered a job to be promoted to be quite a hardcore technical programmer. And it was actually a job they called the chief programmer. And I thought about it, I thought, God, this is great. I'm young. I'm going to get this job. They're going to give me a company car. I can't believe it. And then I thought, and I looked around and I said, but do I want to be hanging around with these people? Because the people who I'd be hanging around with basically looked like members of status quo. So I thought, maybe not. So then I left to become to join a sort of systems integrator, basically, where I started getting a bit more on the business side. So I got very interested about that. And then I started getting interested in how did this all work? How's the whole economic model of this systems integrator I work for, working with big companies around the world, building systems for them? Well, that's kind of interesting. So I went through that. And anyway, went through various things and got much more involved in business processes, finance, and then I ended up being a business consultant for several years, and ended up kind of I got involved in looking after big customers for Texas Instruments, as it was then, and got an opportunity to run a business unit for a whole bunch of their technology services and business process services, and that's how I got into it.
Okay.
That was a very long answer to a simple question, by the way.
Well, it was. But the next question was, when you started that was in the early 1980s, I take it, yeah.
Yeah, my very first job was 1978, actually, at the age of 18, so you can tell how old I am. But
Yeah.
maybe you should delete that. That's embarrassing.
Well, it's good to know you're a little bit older than me. So, but no, it's
It was early 90s this all happened.
okay. Of course it did. Of course it did. Right. Yeah. So, but you said you were working in IT and programming and so on, and this was very much at the beginning of that kind of revolution, really, wasn't it? Were you on punch cards and things like that, or did you move beyond?
That was us going out. My kind of IT career, there was a little bit of that in the first year or two, and then the interesting job I got was in the redevelopment. It was kind of a complete transformation restart of the company I was working for. They had a massive, now it'd be called a business transformation activity, but they set up a new sort of secondary headquarters. They moved all these people in there, lots of people from different companies, the smartest and the best, and then there was me. And they built the supporting systems and processes for that integrated company on what was then very new technology. So it was kind of exciting, but that was all online transaction processing stuff, and pretty much, frankly, not that different to what you might see today.
Mm.
It was all integrated processes. The point was, it was an integrated process from the customer to the products to the distribution mechanism, and that was kind of quite. So they were kind of complicated business problems and complicated technical problems at the time.
But it was an exciting time, wasn't it? Because we were right at the very beginning of something that it boomed rapidly. My own experience at the same time, I was working in EMI, the electronics company, and we were doing handwritten ledgers.
Mm-hmm.
Literally keeping the records by hand at the time, and then we started doing punch cards in the accounting office. This
Mm-hmm.
is and. Did it in house, and then it moved onto 7-inch discs, and it moved very rapidly, right? So that's taking you back, isn't it? So,
I do actually remember a guy who was the head of finance. This was Whitbread, the brewing company. Now it owns Costa Coffee and all sorts of other stuff, and hotels and all sorts of business. Mm. But it was a brewing company, which was one of the reasons it appealed to me as my first job. Yeah, it was kind of interesting world.
One of the key things you said earlier was as you were starting out, you were curious. You were working in the programming and development and so on, but you were intrigued about the business side of things.
I was intrigued about all of it. I was just fascinated by how it all works and how.
So you were curious, weren't you? And you wanted to see what happened before and after the bit that you were doing.
Yes.
Which brings me round to my next question, really, is that a lot of your experience now is in shared service centres. Mm-hmm. And in your opinion, where generally would you say they are on the maturity scale?
Yeah, this is kind of interesting. The whole shared services, global business services thing is kind of interesting. As I said, it's almost like full circle in some respects, because we used to have this idea where everything was not front-end business was management services, and then we went very much into federated businesses where all the finance and operations and everything else were kind of for each business unit. So that, and then I guess in the 90s we realized we can kind of bring this together for a lot of good reasons, economies of scale, standardization, all that. That was good. But it's interesting that even today, some really, really successful young businesses are still not using shared services or GBS. They're still, they have a level of centralization, but they're still on the move to moving there. So I'm talking, some of our customers are right on the cusp of initiating shared services GBS functions. At the other end, so that's people who are moving into it, and they're very successful businesses. So you can't say, these companies are these are 20 billion plus businesses, and they're not doing it yet. So that's kind of interesting. At the other extreme, there are great businesses where they've realized that running the whole back office is not just about the finance processes. It's not just that it includes procurement, operations, it includes HR, and it includes IT. So now you've got GBS leaders who are also the CIO, which I think is a great move, because with the advent of rapid response technologies like RPA and AI and all this stuff, at the moment, for a lot of companies, there's some IT work going on in shared services or GBS. There's a load of IT work going on in the CIO function, and it's coordination problems and duplication problems and all sorts of stuff, and governance problems. So bringing that together, to me, is a perfectly logical thing in the world we're in. So where is shared services and GBS today? It's still all over the map. So there are people, big companies, who are absolute prime candidates for it, who are not yet there. And there are some companies who believe, kind of almost as a matter of business strategy, they don't believe in economies of scale. And there's some very successful companies they know. We let each business unit run everything, including their finance, even they own their own IT, because they are measured purely on performance, and it kind of works well for them. So, that's fine. But then at the other end, there's people who are saying they're really getting this whole run the back office and free everybody else to focus on the consumer and deliver value. And then in the middle, there's a lot of people who are still doing who are doing transactional accounting, shared services, and looking where the next step is. And there's a lot of challenges there about where does the organization report into, because that also guides what your measures of success are and what your aspirations are. So all over the map, I'd say.
Do you think the effects of the last 6 months, the COVID situation, will impact shared services more? Maybe those that are still working in silos, and there are a lot that are, even though they got 200, 300 people under one roof, there's still very much lines of demarcation and so on. So with people working from home, and as you said, the impact on the IT side of things, or probably the awareness of IT more, do you think that will have an impact and push them forward?
I think most organizations have been really positively surprised by how well they responded and turned on a sixpence, turned on a dime to move to remote working, and things had to be digital. Stuff for years we've talked about, or organizations have talked about, barriers to change, and we can't do this because what will our suppliers think, or what will these people think? All of a sudden, when there is no facility to get to process or even get hold of a paper invoice, you suddenly realize every supplier can give you some form of digital invoice, even if it's only a PDF. So we broke down barriers and resistance to change immediately. And I think it's made people realize how much we're capable of doing and some of the things we were kind of sensitive to, perhaps we shouldn't be quite so sensitive to. You can do what you want to do. You can do what you want to do if you're doing the right thing. But I think also, so COVID's had that effect. I think it's accelerated digitization. I'm not sure long term whether it's going to accelerate the maturity that I've talked about, bringing all of these functions together, because that is a highly sensitive organizational issue, because you've got people with received sort of strong power bases that want to do their thing. But it's definitely given this, for all the negatives of COVID, it's definitely given us a positive push about what's possible and how quickly you can move, and that all of these things don't need to take 3 years. You can get stuff done in 3 months really well.
Yeah, I think I'd like to think that's one of the biggest takeaways, is that, as you said, you can react to a situation very quickly. So your protracted RFIs, RFPs, to do something, it doesn't have to take 12 months, does it? It can be done very quickly when the need is there. We'll move on to perhaps one of your favourite subjects right now, and it fits with what we're saying about shared services and maturity. Our old friend Dunning-Kruger and their effect, right? So what's your interpretation of the Dunning-Kruger effect? And does this "they don't know what they don't know" kind of hamper progress in some organizations?
Well, as you and I have discussed before, I think the Dunning-Kruger effect, and if you haven't heard about it, just Google it. It's really interesting. Dunning-Kruger effect it's a very, very powerful reality, in my opinion, and we all suffer from it. So it's not about stupid people or intelligent people. Everybody suffers from this problem, which is the idea that when you approach a problem, or you want to make a decision or form an opinion about something you're responsible for, with very little experience, you can develop massive confidence in your ability to execute something, only to find if you actually have to get involved in executing it, the devil's in the details, very much more painful and nuanced than you thought. You get very depressed and miserable. And if you've got the determination to follow through, you might get to the end of that and end up with a level of expertise. Well, you'll end up becoming an expert, but your level of confidence as an expert is never as high as it was when you were naive at the beginning, which is really, really interesting. And it reminds me, and there's some great, very great people who've said, if you ask, only a fool believes they know everything. Only, if you're confident about the answer, you want to have a think about any complicated problem. You want to think again, because you shouldn't be confident about it. You should be questioning yourself all the time. So I think that whole issue, and it relates to kind of cognitive bias about the things we control, we feel more comfortable about, so we assume we can deal with it. All of those things all come into that Dunning-Kruger effect, and we just have to be really careful to make sure that we are not overconfident in the face of things we don't really have much experience in.
Yeah, and I tend to find this myself in the nature of my work as a coach or a trainer, that a lot of people believe because they've been somewhere a few years that actually makes them experienced, but they either lack the curiosity to find out more about the business, like you were saying earlier, or they're largely not allowed to. Often their horizon is really the environment that they work in. What do you think we can do to so that's where the Dunning-Kruger effect kind of kicks in? When people are promoted, let's say, then they realize that often what happens is people think they've got 5 years experience, but what they actually have is 1 year experience 5 times. Right? Yeah. They're just building on the same thing, playing the same notes on the guitar or the piano. That's not actually developing your spread. So what do you think we need to do, people like you and I in our role, or indeed management and so on, first of all, maybe to realize this situation, and then how to change it?
Right. So I think self-awareness is a critical thing. You've got to, really got to be honest with yourself about what do I know about this situation? How confident am I really? One of the challenges, or one of the things that supports Dunning-Kruger or encourages its persistence in business, is often leaders will say, I want you to get that done. It's obvious. I want it done within 3 months, 6 months, a year, or whatever. I want the business changed. And a lot of people feel almost bullied into saying, okay, well, I'm going to go then. I'm going to behave like I'm confident. I'm going to do this. So there is a need to have some courage to say, you know what, I don't know the answer yet. I do not know the answer. This is my plan to get an answer. I'm not ready to do that. If you think you're ready to do that, get someone else to do it, because I'm not your man or I'm not your woman. And I think that courage, in my experience, people react well to it because it shows you've got your brain on, the brain turned on. So have the courage to say, we're not ready for that. I'm digging into the options. You got to ask, why are we doing this stuff? What is it we're trying to do? What's the real outcome we're trying to get? And what can go wrong? And that's not to be negative about it, but so once you know what can go wrong, how are we going to navigate that? How are we going to get there? And I think being self-aware and encouraging the team to be self-aware and challenge all these things rather than have this kind of determination to charge ahead, we will overcome irrespective. It just doesn't work.
Because I think we're in a lot of, as we call them, back office functions in AP, AR, and so on, the lack of awareness or the lack of not being encouraged to be curious. I think this is a contributory factor to the high levels of turnover of staff, attrition rates. So people get to a certain level and they're told, well, that's it, mate. That's as far as we go here. So rather than saying there's a whole load more to beyond what you've learned, you just started, you just learned the basics. There's a million more things that come, but then often there's a kind of ceiling at that point. So people think, okay, I'll go to AP or GL or something else, So.
And I think the curiosity, that thirst for knowledge, don't just have a thirst for knowledge in your one silo. Be curious about things that go on beyond, and even things that come outside business. That it's amazing how many parallels there are in lots of lines of business, and even things outside business. Whether it's whatever, music, engineering, dance, whatever. People, it's amazing. You hear things, you talk to people who come from different disciplines. You go, oh, that's interesting. That kind of a play that relates to business as well.
It's very true. One of the interviews I'm doing in this series is with a guy who part of in his earlier life he was composing and making music, and he was describing how that was very much how he brings that process, I suppose, now into his business life. He's very methodical. I've got all this raw material, I've got these people, so he's actually putting together a concerto or something as a business. So yes, many parallels to it.
And actually, I'm kind of a bit of a musician as well, and I think that determination thing, when you're in the middle of this stuff, determination to do stuff when it's hard and you can't work it out, you can't work out how you're going to get to the outcome you wanted. That's true in business. You've got to get used to it. It isn't all easy. Sometimes you go through these struggles, and the struggle is part of it. And then that's how you get to the result.
As I said earlier, to acknowledge that you don't know what you don't know, right, and actually just grab that, isn't it? Really, yeah. So what's your musical thing then?
Guitar and singing. I've got a little band. Do a bit of blues rock.
Oh, okay. Can we find you on YouTube?
You can find it on Spotify and Apple iTunes and all sorts of stuff.
What's the name of your band?
It's called Bromma Plan. The name of a tube station in Stockholm.
Okay, that's
BROMMA Plan. You can find it on Spotify and other things, but it's fun. We have a laugh.
There you go. There's a bit of free publicity for you there. So you could go viral after this.
Bike now.
Or it might go the other way, of course.
Exactly. People might be asking for the money back.
No, I'm sure I'm going to check it out after this. So, okay. What the strange events and experiences of 2020, you think there'll be a positive for the business world? I know we covered it a little bit, but where do you kind of see that going from now, really?
I think there will be positives. I do think in general it's too early to draw any major conclusions. I mean, all the debate about working from home and the future of workplace, all this about, I think it's too early to know. I think there's a lot of reasons. I can see all sides of the argument. I don't think I think it'll things will happen. I think there'll be unintended consequences for sure. So, like everything, it's a Dunning-Kruger discussion again. I wouldn't express any confidence how this is going to play out, and I don't think it's obvious which of many routes it's going to end up for business in terms of working style and workplace. I do think the need for speed and agility and ability to respond fast, I think, has been great because it's demonstrated these are not largely technological problems; they're human problems. So we've managed to prove and get over them. So let's move on. So I think there's going to be some positives out there for sure.
Yeah, I think the one positive I see business aside, I think would be on the climate. People are going to travel less or commute to work. I hope so. I think that's one of the things. There will be more demand to work from home as a general practice now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So what advice would you give to the younger you that would perhaps benefit other people that are listening to this?
That's interesting, isn't it? Well, I'd say I think when you're young, and maybe it never leaves you, there's always a bit of, coming to terms with yourself. Be yourself is most important. Be yourself. You are your own you. Get on with it and work hard. Have a thirst for knowledge. Be inquisitive. Ask questions because it makes life much more interesting anyway. There's a great comment. If you want to be interesting, you should be interested. So which relates to a thirst for knowledge. If you have a thirst for knowledge, you become an interesting person. That's a fact. It's just it's a byproduct. And I talked about it earlier. I think having courage of your convictions, but also courage to say, no, I'm not going to do that now. I'm not. I think it's not just courage to take the risk. It's also courage to say, no, now isn't the time. So a bit of courage is never a bad thing.
Yeah, I used to have a friend that used to say, you'll do what it is you want to do when you're ready, when it all kind of feels right. So I think that's actually great advice, and I think that's a very good place to get to the end. And so, Dan, thanks very much for your time today. It's been a real privilege to talk to you and share your experience. And I'm looking forward to sharing this with the audience in a couple of weeks' time.
Thank you very much, Mark. It's been very enjoyable. You've taken me down memory lane. Some things I didn't want to remember, some things I did.
Well, I think it seemed to be a very nice memory lane. So thank you very much indeed.
Okay, thank you.